comments, thoughts about anything we did last time? We're not going to see as much video, so it won't be as much fun this time, but we'll talk some philosophy stuff and go from there. So I'm going to try something different in terms of the way I approach these things, and one of the things I think about is what are the things that I say to people over and over and over again when I see them at clinics and camps and stuff like that, and I think, boy, I really wish they knew these things before they came here, especially since, I teach a lot of three-man camps and stuff, and there's some basic things. And I thought that when we umpire, basically when we do umpiring, we talk about mechanics and responsibilities and things like that. And what I'm going to try to do is combine mechanics, responsibilities, and rules in all one, and kind of do this process where we're not looking at the rules and then looking at mechanics and then looking at other things and then looking at, so we're going to kind of combine them together, see how it works. I'm going to try to build it layer by layer and start with the most important things. So when we think about, one of the things you'll hear a lot when we talk about or you'll hear when people talk about umpiring is about mechanics, or a system of mechanics. And all mechanics really is a set of guidelines, right? You can read there, set of guidelines about who's responsible of what under what circumstances. So this whole book, when you look at this whole book and you leaf through all these pages here, basically this is about who's responsible for what under what circumstances. And that's a lot of circumstances to be responsible for, right? So what I thought was, well, when we talk about umpiring, generally we talk about umpiring in order of responsibilities. So that's kind of what we want to talk about. We have to understand that all mechanics, regardless of whether they're 2-man, 3-man, 4-man, 6-man, or the basic ones we work, and we're going to learn 2-man, is all mechanics are a series of compromises. They're all about compromise. If you have one umpire, there's things you can't see. If you have 2 umpires, there's things you can't see, but there's less things you can't see. If you have 3 umpires, there's things you can't see, but there's still less than you could with 2, etc., etc., etc. And unless and until we can get an infinite number of umpires on the field, there's going to be stuff we can't see or not able to see. So when we think about it, there's an infinite amount of space to be covered by a finite number of guys or girls, right? Finite number of people. And it's given that there's a finite number, we're going to have to make compromises. And we make those compromises in mechanics based on priorities. So the priorities determine the mechanics. So it might be nice to know about what the priorities are. So responsibilities have hierarchy, and that's going to give us the priorities. Some things are more important than others, and we always want to umpire in the order of our priorities. So what are our priorities? Priorities in order are pretty simple. Ball strike, fair foul, safe out, catch, no catch, safe out, then all these other things. Balk, obstruction, interference, touch, retouch. Then there's a whole bunch of other things that keep coming. So everything else, these 4 things, the top 4 things come in order of importance. And then these things, I could have just put them all, I could have put commas, right? I could have listed them all out together. These kind of all come together. But the reason you might have a balk come before obstruction is a pitch can happen before a ball gets batted. The reason you might have obstruction interference is this could prevent a guy from touching a base or retouching a base. So but the most important thing is we want to umpire in order of our priorities, and so our mechanics are set up in order of our priorities. So we start with ball strike, and then we go to fair foul, then we go to catch, no catch, and we go to safe out. Okay? And those are always the order of importance. So if we think about umpiring in that order, or umpiring in terms of mechanics, that means we need to know 3 basic things to be able to accept those responsibilities. We need to know the rules associated with that responsibility. So ball strike, we need to know the rule about ball strike. We need to know the rules about fair foul, catch, no catch, which we dabbled a little bit in last week, right? And then we need to know which umpire should accept the responsibility, right? Which umpire should accept this responsibility. And then we have to know how to move into a position to put ourselves in a position to accept this responsibility. So those are the things that we have to do to be an umpire. We have to know what our responsibilities are in order. We have to know the rules associated with those accepting those responsibilities, who's responsible, and how to get there. We're not going to do the how to get there right away. We're going to leave that alone for a while. We're going to do the other two for a while. So our goal is to make sure that we know each of these. My goal is to make sure you know each of these. So let's start with the first one. Let's start with ball strike, and then we'll move our way through. So what we're going to do is we're going to take it like this. We're going to do ball strike, fair foul like that, and what we'll do is we'll talk about the rule, who's responsible. And then what we'll do is we start to go through that. You'll begin to see where we're supposed to be to accept this responsibility, but our first thing is to know what the rule is and who's responsible. So our very first responsibility is ball strike. And by the way, what I did was I put all the rule references to here are to Federation rules, to the high school rules, since we're a high school rule group. If we want to look at the pro rules, we can open them up and look at the slight differences in those places. But for the most part, ball strike, fair foul, catch, no catch, safe out are pretty much identical. The things that get a little bit weirder are a little bit deeper in the book. Okay. So if we're going to talk about ball strike, now we can talk about rules and mechanics at the same time, and at least to me it seems a little bit less distasteful than just going who's responsible, or just reading rules over and over and over again. Okay? So let's talk about what a ball is. Ball is in Rule 241. Right? Ball is in Rule 241 of the high school rule book. I'm going to try to get you guys, if you guys have, you guys have ever been high school before? Any of you have a high school rule book? You have a high school? I'll see if I can't get some and we can look at them, but I'll show you some of the stuff online. Once you're a member of the Federation and the dues are paid and all that, the rule book is online in the Arbiter. So I can go to the Arbiter and search the entire rule book. So I can find every place where the word ball exists in the rule book and then look back. I can find every place where strike, and that's really kind of cool. It's really useful, especially since we can look at Arbiter online and carry it on our phone and things like that, so it's kind of useful. So let's talk about what a ball is. A ball is a pitch which is not touched by the bat and is not a strike. It's easy enough, right? It's a pitch that's not touched by the bat and it's not a strike. And then when you see these rules, 7-2-1 and 7-2-2, those are the rules that are referring to. So we're going to talk about those rules. We're going to pick apart those rules a little bit. So a pitch which is not touched by the bat and is not a strike, as in Rule 721. Well, here's Rule 721. Rule 721 says a strike is charged to the batter when. So that means all of these things are strike, which we'll cover again in a second because we're going to go back to strike. So in other words, if it's not a strike, that is, it doesn't cover these things, okay? Or a ball is credited to the batter when the pitch is not touched by the bat, and it is not a strike when there is an illegal pitch, a penalty, or a pitcher delay. So if you look at this, how many rules are involved in just ball? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that means if we're really going to understand ball, we're going to have to go through 7 different rules to understand what ball means or when a ball can happen. We're going to do it from the strike side because it's a little bit easier to deal with, because if it's not a strike, it's a ball. And then we'll come back to these things. So really pretty simple. What's a ball? It's a pitch that ain't a strike. That narrows it right down, right? Because we all know what a strike is. It's a pitch that's not a ball. No, kidding. Okay? So what's a strike? Well, a strike is, from Rule 721, a strike is charged to the batter when a pitch enters any part of the strike zone, Rule 235-1, in flight and is not struck at. Well, in flight's a definition somewhere, right? Didn't we talk about in flight the other day? Remember what in flight was?
Oh, that's the ground.
It's pitched, hit, or thrown, and hasn't touched the ground or
An object foreign to the field.
object foreign to the field or
Left field player.
an offensive player, right? I'm sorry, defensive player. Defensive player when it's batted, right? All those things are important. So we have to know in flight. So a pitch A pitch enters any part of the strike zone in flight and is not struck at. That means the hitter didn't swing at it. And that's what they mean by struck at, not struck at. The second part is a pitch is, well, we'll go down through them. A pitch is struck at and missed, even if the pitch touches the batter. So the guy swings at a pitch and it hits him, then it's a strike. So if he swings at the pitch and the ball hits him in the hand, he goes boom, the ball hits him in the hand.
It's a foul ball.
Nope,
It's not?
it's a strike. It's a strike. It's not a foul ball.
What happened to, okay. How about?
Because-
Our hands are part of the bat.
Nope, the hands are not part of the bats. I got a little quiz for you to take. I'm gonna send you guys a little homework quiz. I forgot to bring it with me today. I'm gonna send you a little homework quiz. The joke is when people say the hands are part of the bat, say, head you over to Dick's Sporting Goods, pick up a bat, and see if it comes with hands.
Become bat and go from down.
Here's why people might say the hand is part of the bat. If the guy swings at the pitch and it hits him, now we got another rule. Okay, we have another rule. You know what rule that might be? We're going to off-road here for a second. You know what rule that might be?
Check swing?
Nope. He swings at a pitch and it hits him.
Is he out of the box?
If he swings at a pitch and it hits him, if the ball hits an offensive player, a pitch hits an offensive player, the ball is dead. The ball is dead. So now we have to understand what dead ball and live ball mean. So at some point we're going to have to go read about dead ball and live ball. We won't do that right now, but we're going to have to understand dead ball, live ball. So that can be some of the confusion why people think the hands are part of the bat, because of dead ball, live ball. Because on a foul ball, the ball ends up dead. When you swing at the pitch and it hits you, it ends up dead. But it's not foul, because we're going to see here in a second as we read down some other things, okay? A pitch becomes foul when a batter has less than 2 strikes, right? A strike is charged to the batter when a pitch becomes foul and has less than two strikes. So it becomes foul if the guy hits it, and we already know the rule about fair foul because we did that one last week, right? It ends up settling on or over fair, settles on foul territory before it reaches the base, passes the base in foul territory, or hits something foreign to the field in foul territory. Right? And it's a strike. A pitch becomes a foul tip even on a 3rd strike or a foul from an attempted bunt. So on a foul tip, so now we got another rule, and I forgot to stick the one in there. And bunt is also another rule. So we have to know, remember we talked about what a bunt was last time? And then a foul tip. So notice every time we read a rule, here's what makes baseball rules or any rules tough. They never come alone. Every rule gets attached to a bunch of different other rules. And if you don't know the other rules, it makes it difficult to understand the rule you're talking about. And the deeper we get into the book, the more rules get tacked on and the more stuff that we have to know, which is why we have to know the real basic stuff. Okay, and we're going to talk about a foul tip in a minute. This one is peculiar. This one does not exist in the professional rule book, OBR, and it does exist in the college rule book. And that is a batter delays, and we're going to go through what a batter delays means. If a batter delays, he can be charged with a strike. If a batter delays, he can be charged with a strike, and we'll talk about that one. Or if a batted ball contacts the batter in the batter's box, it's also a strike because it's a foul ball, and we'll talk about that in a second as well. Okay, so everybody good about what a strike is? Really simple. Okay? The strike zone, because we had a rule in there that said the strike zone. So what's the strike zone? Well, the strike zone,
The shoulder.
the strike zone is the space over home plate, the top of which is halfway between the batter's shoulders and the waistline, and the bottom being the knees when he assumes his natural batting stance. In the professional rule book and the college rule book, it's a little bit different. It says midway between the top of his shoulders and the top of his uniform pants when he prepares to hit the pitch, and then the bottom being the knees when he assumes. In the pro book and the college book, it says the bottom is the hollow at the bottom of the knee. And last I checked, I'm not sure anybody knows what a hollow at the bottom of the knee means, but it says hollow at the bottom of the knee. So notice the high school rule book is slightly different than the college and the pro book. This one says knees, the other one says at the hollow at the bottom of the knee. And we'll talk a little bit about that difference in a second. Okay. The height of the strike zone is determined by the batter's normal batting stance. Right? So it says at the bottom being when he assumes his natural batting stance. The pro rule book is split, and let's look at the, if I can find it really quick, we'll look at the pro. I didn't put the pro definition in here, and I probably should have, but let's see. Which way are you going to do this for me? And you're going to see there's slight differences just in the way the words are written. Rules. Official baseball rules. So we can kind of compare the differences in the rule book. And not that it, and again, most of the time if you're umpiring, like, Little League or something, they'll have a slightly different rule, but let's find strike zone here. You go away. Come on. Zone. Me to zone. Anybody want to buy me a new computer?
Well, first off, if you have a Dell, that's your problem.
Okay. So what are you going to buy me?
I ain't buying you nothing, guy. I ain't got no money to buy you one.
Dang, so if you had money, you would buy me one? Is that what you're telling me? I got that going for me then. I like that. I like that. Right, so here's the definition of a strike in the pro rule book, right? Struck at by the batter and missed, is not struck if any of the ball passes or any part of the strike zone, is fouled by the batter when he has less than 2 strikes, is bunted foul, touches the batter as he strikes at, touches the batter in flight in the strike zone, or becomes a foul tip. So pretty much the same, right? They add touches him in the strike zone, which for us would be the same thing because it says passes through the strike zone and not touched. Right? So the definition of a strike is pretty much the same. And I'm willing to bet you the definition of ball is pretty much the same. So we look over here, definition of ball. Come on. A ball is a pitch which does not enter the strike zone in flight and is not struck at by the batter. Okay, so here's an interesting, the comment says, if the pitch touches the ground and bounces through the strike zone, it is a ball. Okay, if the pitch touches, if such a pitch touches the batter, he shall be awarded first base. If the batter swings at such a pitch after 2 strikes, the ball cannot be caught, and if the batter hits a pitch, he hits it. So that we also interpret the same thing kind of in the college game. So let's go back down to strike zone. Strike zone. Strike zone. Okay. The strike zone is the area over home plate, the upper limit of which is a horizontal line at the midpoint between the top of the shoulders and the top of the uniform pants, and the lower level is a line at the hollow beneath the kneecap. Pretty much the same, right? Depending on how we interpret at the knee. Right? Depending on how we interpret at the knee. And we'll talk about that in a second, okay? And then there's a diagram. And then the college rule book is pretty much written the same way. And since you guys won't be working any college baseball soon, we won't worry about it. When you work college baseball, we can worry about it. Fair enough, Pete?
Yep.
If he crouches or leans over to make the shoulder line lower, the umpire determines height by what would be the batter's normal stance. So this already sounds pretty black and white, right? Sounds pretty black and white? What does it mean when he accepts his normal stance? And didn't the pro rule book have a similar thing about the stance or not?
I'm gonna take a gander at it. It's when the pitcher takes the rubber.
Okay.
What the
So what if he just stands up like this?
That
then
would be
that's
no
very-
batting stance.
Anybody ever see anybody hit like this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm willing to bet you don't.
Sheffield.
I'm willing to bet you never hit like that. I'm willing to
No,
bet you by the
slow.
time he hit, he was here.
Yeah.
There's a difference between this and this. So is this stance? Or is this stance? Right, and what did the pro book say? Remember what the pro book said? Because they're all kind of related and we use them to help us understand each of them. And they don't tell us anything about his stance, right?
What's it between the shoulders?
And it just says between the shoulders and there. And while we're at it, why not? I'll get an old college rule book out and look at what that one says. And the college rule book hasn't changed since. So if we slide down in the college rule book, and you can see pretty much they're all let's see, in the college rule book, what's a ball? A ball is a pitch or partial delivery that does not enter the strike zone and meets one of the 5 criteria. Oh geez, so that means we gotta go find the criteria. Strike zone. Strike zone. The area over home plate from the bottom of the kneecaps, so there's no hollow there, right? From the bottom of the kneecaps. To the midpoint between the top of the shoulders and the top of the uniform pants, the strike zone shall be determined from the batter's stance as he's prepared to swing at the pitched ball. Oh crap. We got normal stance, nothing, and is prepared to hit a pitched ball. Sounds like we have 3 different definitions of strike zone. We got knees, hollow at the bottom of the knee, and bottom of the kneecap. Sounds like we have 3 different strike zones. But they all come from the same place. They're all thinking about the same thing. So that might be something to keep in mind when we think about the strike zone. Okay? So, again, we have an issue here that we have to be concerned with, okay? And that is, if he crouches or leans over to make the shoulder line lower, the umpire determines height by what would be the batter's normal stance. I would say normal stance and go back to the college rule and add some thought from that in the pro rule, and then the way I learned it in pro school is it's about, you're going to call it as hitters prepare to hit. You know, if the guy's way squatched over like this, Ricky Henderson, right? He stands up to hit. So that's what we're going to worry about, right? Because think about what we're trying to do. We're trying to give the batter a fair chance to be able to hit a batted ball. And where does he hit a batted ball? He hits a batted ball from here, right? He's got a stance, his knees are bent, he's bent. He doesn't hit from here, and he doesn't hit from here. So if you think about it, what we're trying to do, and here's one of the things you always want to do with rules, anytime you have to do is rules, is you don't want to be a black and white rule guy, right? You don't want what's called a black letter law rule guy, right? Read the rules and every rule, when you enforce it or think about it, should be enforced and thought about with spirit and intent. What's the spirit of the rule and what was the intent of the rule? If you think about every rule was written for us with a spirit and intent in mind, it becomes much easier to think about how to apply that rule if you get stuck. And if you do things, understand there's two great phrases I learned a long time ago in umpiring. Spirit and intent, right? Spirit and intent, and common sense and fair play. Spirit and intent, common sense and fair play. What would be fair? If you don't know what to do, think about what would be fair right here. If you don't know what to do. Now there's going to be some stuff that happens that's not fair. But it's written out and it's not fair. Right? Guy standing in fair territory down the third baseline, a guy hits a P-rod and hits him in the head and he gets knocked out and they got to take him to the hospital, he's in fair territory, he's out. It's not fair, but by rule, right, we have a rule that says we don't care about fair right here. What's fair? Make sense? So we have to think about common sense and fair play, okay? Spirit and intent. So somebody asked me about box, he asked me about box. Whenever I think about box, I think of common sense and fair play and spirit and intent, right? If Peyton's over there coaching his team and his fat kid catcher's on first base and he's up 10-0 in the top of the last inning and the pitcher on the other mound goes like this and throws a pitch and he's yelling balk, I'm going to look at him like he's got snakes crawling out of his ears. Who are you kidding? Let's be honest. That kid ain't running, okay? And that kid ain't holding him, so let's go spirit and intent, common sense and fair play. Who's being hurt at this point? Nobody. Let's just move along. Let's let the game, right? Anybody referee, any sport? The thing, swallow the whistle, right? There's a time when you swallow the whistle. You just let the stuff go. Swallow the whistle. Let it go. And so, again, spirit and intent. Go ahead, Pete. Now, please, I'm not telling you to violate rules. I'm not telling you to do that.
Talking about the rules or whatever, and 89-foot league.
Say that again?
The 89-foot league. Guy goes and fouls the ball off. You have to make an attempt to go back to the bag. You do not have to touch the bag.
We'll come back to that. Hold on that. We'll hold on that. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that at some point. That's a good question. He's talking about after a foul ball, do you have to go back and touch the base? By rule, you do, but again, common sense and fair play. What are they trying to accomplish? The intent is the guy doesn't stand, because in the oldie time days, you know what happened? A guy would hit a foul ball, and the guy would go from the guy that was on first base would go stand like this, and this was second base, and wait for the ball to get put in play. As soon as the ball got put in play, he'd stand on second base. Because you can't put him out, because the ball's dead, because it was foul. And the ball and the rule didn't say he had to go back and touch first, so guys figured they just stand next to second like this. As soon as the umpire said play, they'd go like this, because the ball has to be, for the ball to be put in play. We'll learn this too. Ball in play, out of play. Pitcher has to be on the rubber with the ball. So there's no way to get that guy out. So that's why they added you have to go back and touch your base. So really, all we want you to do is go back somewhere over there so you're not cheating, right? That's spirit and intent. Okay.
Why wouldn't you just stand on the bag? You can't get out if you're
You have
standing
to
on the bag.
make the
Because he has to start at first base, and if he's standing on second, he's acquired second, and now he's not starting at first. They were smart enough to figure that out.
I see, he was.
He was out. He was on first. That was just his lead. He took an 89-foot lead.
I got you.
All right. If you see, notice there's something here in the high school rule book. When you see dashes, that's the rule book. When you see dots, that's a case book. The case, you know, when we just read the pro rule book, it said comment. That's like a case book. And then there's another big. I have a couple other big books of rules and interpretations. There's a Major League Baseball umpire manual to help us understand. There's a whole bunch of other things to help us understand rules, spirit, and intent. But the case book in high school. So here's a case book ruling that goes along with the strike zone. The pitch is across home plate at the batter's armpits. This is a ball. Had the pitch been halfway, it would have been a strike. Comment, it's not necessary that the entire ball, when legally pitched and before it has touched the ground but not swung at, to pass through the batter's strike zone. It is a strike when any part of the ball on a legal pitch enters the strike zone. The umpire shall determine a batter's strike zone according to the usual stance of the batter. So we're back to that again, right? So that's the case book or comment section of that. So again, what does it mean for stance? It seemed really easy. It says that, right? It's in black and white, stance. We've already seen there's some ambiguity in what stance means, right? So what I do, and what most guys do, is interpret stance means he's now in a position to hit the baseball. Okay? And that's going to change. If a guy stands up real tall like this, you don't want to call this pitch a strike, because when he gets ready to hit, that pitch is over his hands, and that's not fair. And you don't want to call this pitch right here a ball to the guy that's like this, because when he goes to hit, it's going to be belly button high. That's not fair either. Okay? So that's why we want to temper that with, we have to add, notice, there isn't going to be a rule here that we're not going to have some interpretation over. Right? There's not going to be a rule that's like that. Okay? Good? So, let's think about strike zone. All right, I know that's a little bit small, and all I did was I took the words and put it next to this. So there's a picture, kind of a strike zone, and I'm going to make a bigger one than this, but the strike zone is the space over home plate. By the way, we haven't defined home plate yet. Okay? We got to define home plate. It's over home plate. Here's the top of his shoulders, the top of his uniform pants, midpoint. And now here's the hollow at the bottom of the knee, but the high school says the knee, so that might be the purple line. Because is hollow of the knee different than knee, or does knee mean bottom of the knee? But it just said if the ball touches any part of the strike zone, it's a strike. So if this is the bottom of the knee, the hollow of the knee, right, this little dude right here, and the ball goes here in high school, or here in high school, if it's here in high school, is it touching the knee? So is there really any difference in the bottom end of the strike zone in the three rule books?
Depends on where the hollow of the bottom of the knee is.
And in the college book it says bottom of the kneecap, right? The pro book says hollow at the bottom of the knee, and this one says knees. Anybody really think there's a significant difference between those three things?
If they're low, call them a strike.
Well, your motto is, if they don't bounce, call them a strike. I've seen you work, right? That's Jess's motto. If they don't bounce, well, hell, if they bounce, call them
If the
strikes.
catcher catches it, you just.
If the ball stops rolling when it hits the backstop, call it a strike. All right, so this is a picture I graphed off the internet. This is Ichiro, obviously. Right? That's Ichiro.
Yeah.
Here's a midpoint. Here's the top of his shoulder, top of his uniform pants, right? We take midway between those two, which is kind of interestingly enough, if you think, we'll talk a little bit as we start to think about strike zone physically. It's usually pitches below the guy's hands, because most guys carry their hands right about that point. That's where most guys swing from when they swing. If you think about the way most guys are going to swing it, kind of the way they start, their hands are going to be, or even their elbows can't get much above that when they prepare to swing. And then we have the bottom. Here's the hollow according to the hollow of the knee, and that would be the middle of the knee. And that'd be that slight difference between the two. I drew that line in there. Okay? Or we can... Got excited because things didn't go fast enough. Do this. Okay, here's another picture of it. Right? The strike zone is the space over home plate, top of which is halfway. So here's another look at it. Okay, over halfway, and I have this red box in here. I'm going to talk about in a second. But this is the strike zone right here. This box right here. This box right here. Okay, that's the strike zone right there. Okay? And this is the hollow at the bottom of the knee, and that's like right in the middle of the kneecap. Okay? So the middle of the kneecap and the bottom of the knee, you might be able to squeeze a ball in there, right? You might be able to squeeze a ball in between those two things. Okay? So that's what the strike zone looks like. Now there's a reason, by the way, when we think about strike zone and calling strikes and calling pitches, is that I have a box up there that's not the strike zone. By definition, it's not the strike zone.
The plate.
Because if I take this down, that's over the plate. That's not over the plate, and that's not over the plate. Here's what I'm going to suggest to you. If you want to be an effective umpire,
If it's close enough, call it a strike.
that's a strike and that's a strike.
Is that supposed to be the black?
No, that's supposed to be in between the two white lines that are drawn down for batter's boxes.
I mean,
Yeah, you can call it black, right? You call it. So let's think about, and again, I want to talk about common sense and fair play. Okay, common sense and fair play, spirit and intent. Think about this. As kids learn to play baseball, the dimensions of the field change, right? The dimensions change, glove size changes, bat size changes, balls change a little bit. They're a little bit lighter, a little bit heavier, but the plate doesn't change. So that means you're asking an 8-year-old kid to throw to the same target as Clayton Kershaw threw to and had an ERA of like 1.1 or whatever the heck it was this year, some ungodly.
Actually,
It was under
smaller, because the kids are small.
Was his 2, right? Under 2. But anyway, think about that. We're asking him to throw to the same target this way. That hardly seems like common sense and fair play, does it? And now if you go, the kids get a little bit older, it seems a little bit less. But even at the high school level, does it really seem fair to have a high school kid throw over the same object that Clayton Kershaw throws over? Seriously, does this seem fair?
no.
Probably not, right? Okay. So we're gonna think a little bit about strike zone, a little bit of philosophy about strike zone. What I've done is kind of, these are baseballs. Okay, these are baseballs. So we said anything that touches the strike zone is a strike. So that dude's a strike right there, right? That dude's a strike. And by the way, should be symmetrical, but because I had grid on when I set this up, it kept pushing it a little bit. But this distance and that distance should be the same, which is why I put 2 balls inside of both of them, okay? They should be the same. And then a pitch that touches way up here, that would be a strike, because it just touched the strike zone. And then the pitch, down here. So if you look at the kneecap, maybe we're touching here, so we're gonna get here, there's not a big difference, okay? So we want to think about when we're calling strikes, or thinking about strikes, thinking about what a strike is. If the ball is over here or over here, it's only a small bit of amount off the plate because these 2 guys, right? We agree by rule, these 4 guys are strikes, right? By rule, okay? So let's think a little bit more about strike zone. To understand strike zone, then we got to understand the plate. We haven't talked about the plate yet. And then there was a thing about the batter's box in there. If a guy gets hit by a pitch in the batter's box, and all that kind of stuff. So let's talk a little bit about why all that stuff works. Here's a picture of a layout, and the cool thing is this is pretty much the same in all the rule books. The catcher's box might be slightly different. I don't care about the catcher's box, but batter's boxes are 6 feet long, right? 4 feet wide, and they're centered at the little back edge of the plate right here. They're centered they should be centered where the plate does that. Okay, that's where the center of them should be. They are 6 inches. The inside line of the batter's box is 6 inches from the inside edge of the plate. 6 inches. Okay. The plate is 17 inches wide. Right? 17 inches wide. You know how wide the bases are typically, by the way? Anybody?
12?
17.
Nope. They're 15. They're 15. And they can be 3 to 5 inches tall. There's a rule about it. And rule number 1 about the field. Okay? There's a rule about it. Anyway, so let's think about this. I'm talking about strike zone. And now what we're talking about is if we look down on the top from the strike zone, a pitch has to pass over here, right? It has to touch the plate. Pitch has to touch the plate somewhere. Okay? So let's think about something. Rule 131 says a ball is a sphere formed by yarn wound around a small core of cork, rubber, or similar material and covered with 2 strips of white horsehide or 2 strips of white cowhide tightly stitched together. it shall be 5 to 5¼ ounces in weight and have a circumference of 9 to 9¼ inches. And that's the same in all 3 rule books, except in the Pro Book, I think it says it shall be 5 to 5¼ ounces avoirdupois. That's what it says, avoirdupois, which is a method of measuring weights, like avoirdupois, as opposed to metric or whatever, I don't know, avoirdupois. So if we have a ball that's 9 to 9¼ inches wide, okay, we have a ball that's 9 to 9¼ inches wide, or circumference, that means around, what's its diameter? And you all remember your geometry class and your high school algebra and all that, and the diameter is the circumference divided by pi, that magical 3.1415 number, blah, 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 right? So if I take 9.9 to 9¼ and divide it by pi, I get 2.86 to 2.94 inches. So a ball has to be 2.86 to 2.94 inches across. Can we all agree to call it 3 inches? Can we all agree to call it 3 inches? Okay. How far is it from here to there?
6.
6. So if a ball goes off the plate, but inside is touching the edge of the batter's box line, how far from the plate is it?
3 inches. 3 inches.
It's only 3 inches from the plate, right? That's only 3 inches from the plate. That's only that much. It's only that much. It's only 3 inches. Is that very far from the plate?
Well,
By definition, that's a ball, isn't it? By the rule book, that's a ball. Okay. Do you want to survive and umpire baseball and not be on TV or worry about, and you don't have to worry about being on TV? That pitch cannot be a ball. The pitch has to be a strike. So here's something, if you think about it. And for those, if you're worried about, oh my God, the pitcher won't be able to reach, it's horrible, the hitter can't hit that, blah, 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 blah. Let's think about this. How long are a kid's arms, a hitter's arms? 30 inches maybe? 33? Mine are 33 and they're not very long, right? So 33, and then I got my hand. So if I go like this, if I'm standing here and I got a bat in my hand, and this is 33 inches from here to here, and my bat, how long the bat, kind of what do high school kids hit with?
32.
30 couples. 30 couples, right? So let's see, 30 couple and 30 couple makes at least 60, right? That's at least 5 feet. Okay, so he can go from here, he can reach 5 feet. Plate is 17 inches. How many feet is that? 1.5 maybe, right? If I add this 6 inches over here, it's 23, call it 2. If I add this 6 inches and he stands right up against the plate, he's only got to reach 29 inches, and his arms are long enough to do that, which means he could daggum near stand another 30 inches from the plate, right? Which would be more than halfway back of the batter's box, the hitter's box, right? Because this is 48 inches wide, and still have his bat go over the outside edge of the plate. There ain't a kid alive that can't reach that pitch that touches over here and hit it. Well, maybe not hit it, but reach it. Okay, I'll give him reach it, right? Agreed? So, common sense and fair play, do you reckon that pitch is a strike?
I've gotten tossed because I've argued that as well.
What's that?
I've gotten tossed because I've argued it, and I know.
You argued that it wasn't a strike?
I told the guy he's got batter's box and batter's box. You just string it back.
You see, the problem is you're a hitter, you're not a pitcher. If you were a pitcher, you want it to be batter's box to batter's box.
Yeah, I mean,
Here's another way to think about it. When I'm umpiring, who do I have to see more, a pitcher or a hitter?
Pitcher.
I gotta see a pitcher. You know, I see a pitcher for at least 18, 20, 25 hitters, right? I see the hitter in that time maybe twice. Look, shooter, swing the bat or get out. I just, you know, no, and all kidding aside, common sense and fair play, spirit and intent. Right? The more the more things that we call strikes, now think about this from game management, which is another whole topic and another day of another thing, is the game works better when it's moving, right? Nobody likes a game where, like, Roberto Clemente's famous for having saying you don't walk off the island, right? And what he meant was is you're not going to get there by taking pitches, swing the bat. So one of the ways we can encourage people to swing the bat is have an aggressive strike zone. Not silly. Notice I didn't say call a pitch that's on top of the white line to strike. That might be silly. Again, depending on level, things like that, that might be silly to call it there. You could get in a lot of trouble. That's probably not fair. Okay, that's probably not fair. Okay. But if you call this pitch and you encourage kids to swing at pitches, because we'll talk about strike zone philosophy a lot. If you encourage kids to swing at pitches, pitchers will be excited to be on the mound and to throw strikes. And if they're excited to be on the mound and throw strikes, they're more likely to throw balls near the plate. If they're more likely to throw balls near the plate, they're more likely to throw quickly, get the ball and pitch. If they throw quickly and the ball's in play more, infielders are on their toes more, they make fewer errors, the ball game gets played better, right? So when the game is played like that, the whole thing gets better. Fewer pitches, all that kind of stuff. Nobody wants to watch a walk fest. So what I'm suggesting to you is that both inside and outside, if the ball is that far off the plate, be realistic and think about that as a strike. Okay, think about that as a strike. Even though the rule book says what? Passes over the plate, the top of which is the midpoint between the batter's waist and the top of his shoulders, the bottom of which is the knees. That's the rule book strike zone. So think about that when we think about. So again, think about every rule. No rule is black and white in its interpretation. We already know there's interpretation in the rule, right? Because it said what? We forgot that thing about stance, didn't we? What does it mean for stance? What does any of that stuff mean? Okay? So what I want you to think about is I've drawn a slightly different strike zone there. Okay? I've drawn a slightly different one. I've taken all three, I've taken the box that the rule book says, right? And basically if you run this line straight up like that from the edge of the batter's box, that's where that line goes, and it'd be similar over here. And then what I've done is I've made an octagon. Because look, I'm willing to admit that I'm going to call pitches off the plate strikes. Okay? But if a pitch is off the plate and way up near the top of the strike zone, that's kind of hard to hit, right? That's going to be, you're talking about a guy trying to reach a pitch up here and hit that. Here, no big deal. Up here it changes a little bit, right? You can even see the difference in the way I have to. So what you might want to think about, and this is one of the things I don't think enough people think about, is because I ask people this question all the time. Have you ever thought about what your strike zone is? And they look at me, I said, what's strike zone? And they give me the rule book definition. I said, that's not the question. We do a lot of preparing as umpires, right? We're going to go through a lot of training. We're going to go through a lot of visualization. We're going to talk a lot about things. Planning, right, there's that old 5 P's or 6 P's, right? Piss poor planning thing, right? Blah, 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 prevents poor, well, you know the whole thing, right? You've heard that? No?
Mm-hmm.
Piss poor planning prevents piss poor performance? Or
No,
something
something prior planning prevents piss poor performance.
like that? There you
Something prior planning prevents piss poor performance, right? In other words, when we do lots of things and we learn to do things, we have to figure out, we have to have an idea about what we're doing when we're going in. If you don't have a visualization of what your strike zone is when you go in, what the strike zone looks like when you go in and you're sitting back there looking at pitches, it's going to be hard for you to say when a ball comes whizzing by, like, and not whizzing by, whizzing at you. Here comes a ball, whoosh, coming right at you, and you have to go, did that go through that little box I just saw Ichiro standing next to? if I don't have in my mind what I think that looks like, it's going to be hard. So what I would suggest and what I tell people is, I know what I think about my strike zone. If it's in between the white lines, okay, if it's in between the white lines, it's above, it's around the knees, and we'll talk more about how to see this later. This is different, okay? And it's below his hands. I'm going to call it a strike, unless you get up in these corners, right? Get up in these corners. And some people will call this a phrase, some people use for this, is a pitch like this, especially that little square right here, and if I had a similar square over here, these little corners right here are what are sometimes are called two plane misses. You missed out and down. If you miss in one direction, I might be able to help you. Right? So if he throws a pitch belly button high, just off the plate, throws this pitch belly button high, and it's before the white line, there isn't anybody in the world that can't hit that ball out of the ballpark that can play. Call that pitch a strike. But if he throws that same pitch over there, that's at the bottom of the knee, off the plate, is that fair to the hitter? Now you want him to be able to throw the ball at the bottom of the knee on the plate, right? Because that's where he wants to throw it. But if he starts throwing it off the plate at the bottom of the knee, that's really hard for a hitter to hit, isn't it? So be fair to the hitters. Give a little bit back to the hitters. So when I envision my strike zone, it looks like a stop sign. Now I couldn't quite get the edges quite what I wanted. I would prefer this edge to be more down in here and here, but you get the idea. So now I have an idea when I'm looking what my little shape looks like when it goes through. And then the other things we're going to talk about when we start to actually get on the field is using a catcher to help us do all that kind of stuff. Okay, and talking about, we're not ready for that yet, we're just learning the rule right now. And I probably shouldn't even be doing this right now, but I want to get it in your mind right now that this rule is not black and white. This rule is absolutely not black and white, despite the fact that everybody who's ever played baseball swears that it is. Okay? Everybody who's ever played the game swears this rule is black and white. All the fans in the world swear this rule is black and white. It's not black and white. Even the way it's written, it's vague. There's some things that are very clear, right? Over the plate. That's the only part that's clear. Because top of the uniform pants, midway between the top of the uniform pants and the top of the shoulders. What? Where the? How the? Who the? So when I'm standing up here, that line's very different than I'm like this, aren't I? Right? If I go like this, that's why they have to have stance. So when is that there? So you know when you're watching on TV and they show the little box on TV? That box is nonsense. Because if you pay attention, it never changes size for anybody that's hitting. It never changes up or down, and it never changes long this way.
You always see that ball that's outside, whatever. And
So-
gets 'em, so.
Replay and the people that are demanding replay in baseball are gonna wreck the game. Because it's people that don't understand the game, that want the game to be played in a different way. The players don't want it to be played that way, but it's a different story. Let's take a little bit of a break, because we've been at it for 55 minutes. I was hoping to do 45 and then break. Let's take a little bit of a break. Take 5 or 10 minutes just to go like this. We'll come back, we'll do this, and we'll get out of here. We'll take about another 45 minutes and we'll get out of here.
We're going more on this?
A little bit.
Soon?
Yeah, a little bit.
'Cause I'm thinking